Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event on the future of genomic medicine. Very warm welcome from the Yorkshire and Humber Genomic Medicine Centre and all the people who take part of it. Some of them you're going to hear speak just in a few minutes. I've been asked to just preface the talks with just a reminder that this is part of the Life Festival, and there are many other events going on of a similar nature, from covering various aspects of biological sciences and health. There are leaflets available, there are badges, and please patronise these events if you possibly can. So the Genomics Medicine Centre, which is, I suppose, sponsoring this event tonight, is a partnership between Leeds Teaching Hospitals, Sheffield Teaching Hospitals and Sheffield Children's Hospitals, and the relevant academic partners as well. We have just been commissioned by NHS England, and the first patients are just being recruited now to the programme. And as we go through this evening, you'll hear some of the aspects of what's going on. So we have 3 talks this evening from 3 Sheffield-based members of the GMC, which will cover many aspects of genomics medicine, cancer, the informatics side of things, and the diagnostic side, how we actually elucidate genomic data. And hopefully that will build into a picture of what genomic medicine is about. And just before we get going, I just want to preface this with 2 slides that hopefully will set some context. This is a famous picture of Watson and Crick, who described the structure of DNA. Don't want to talk about that because other members of the panel may discuss that later. The point I want to just raise is the tiny bit at the top of the paper, which is the date, which was April the 25th, 1953, which is quite a long time ago. I don't think the Queen was the Queen. I think Sir Winston Churchill may have been Prime Minister, and I think I was -2. And so the reason for showing this is why, after this very long time, when the Queen's 90 and I've got a senior rail card, we're now talking about this today. And it's a coincidence of 3 things which have come together, which allow us to now develop this subject of genomic medicine. And the first was the Human Genome Project, which actually produced the reference sequences of what the DNA sequence of a human being is. And that's interesting in itself. But there's 2 other massive developments that happened. And the first was the ability to readily sequence DNA. And the first DNA sequences took a decade, cost a huge amount of money, but the little device over in the corner there is a benchtop sequencer, which will generate sequencing in a very much shorter period of time for a much, much smaller sum of money. And we're approaching the point where generating DNA sequencing, the costs and the time will not be a problem at all in this. And that comes to the third element which has been developed, and that is computing power. So genomic sequences by themselves tell you very little. You have to link that to data about the owner of those sequences, and you have to do that on a big scale. And then genomic medicine is about applying those data sets to the care of patients. So we're talking about this today because only very recently have these 3 elements come together. And the first talk we have is from Wyn Hyde, who's going to introduce to you the idea of bioinformatics. And bioinformatics, put simply, I suppose, is the wiring that links these 3 things together. It takes the sequences, refers them to the reference sequences, and then builds it into data sets. So that's the first element in the program, and hopefully when slides up, and I'll hand over now to Wyn.
Thank you very much for coming here to learn and to see what's happening in genome medicine in Yorkshire. Isn't that a strange combination of words, genome medicine in Yorkshire? I never thought I'd be uttering those. But I'll tell you right now, today is a very exciting day for me. 2.5 years ago, I thought, you know, this genome medicine thing's going to hit. It's going to hit. I want to be part of it. And I was thinking about ways where that could really happen. And I never for a moment thought that would happen. I'd be standing in Yorkshire having this discussion with you, because 2.5 years ago I was sitting in the School of Public Health at Harvard. And I don't want to talk too much about myself, but I do want you to know that I've been looking forward to today for a very, very long time. And the reason is that I feel that myself and others, and you too, have an opportunity now to be part of what I call the new medicine. And if you think about medicine, medicine's treatment for when you're ill. It's, I'm ill, I need to go see the doctor talks to you, you either get better or you don't. And that's it. And that's how it's been. That's how it's been for a while, right? But now it's going to change. And that change is going to be, you have an opportunity not to be ill. We as a people in this country have an opportunity to not be ill and not go to see the doctor because of the aspects that I'm going to show you. There's a path that we have to go where the doctor will know that you are sick before you do. And that is what is cool about this project. We will have the knowledge to treat people before they need to be treated, to get in the way between the disease that comes and its actual manifestation. So a lot about medical care is educated guess. It can be a pretty well-educated guess, but if you present with spots on your skin, the doctor can make a decision based upon the way you look and the way he knows that he can run through a checklist and think this is acne, this is measles. That's based upon a guess, or when it goes down to something he's not quite sure of, he's going to run some assays. And sometimes there's a delivery based upon exclusion of all other kinds of diagnosis, right? But what happens if the decisions can be based on what happened to people like you? That might be what we call evidence-based medicine, but I'm talking about people like you, and like you, exactly like you. In other words, evidence that is about you. That's a different story. So how do we get to that path? How do we take that path? The genome will be your guide. So in order for that to happen, we have to think about technology. Consider, for instance, the microscope. What did we understand about cells before the advent of the microscope? Not much, because we didn't know they existed. When we understood that cells existed, that is the time when we thought the cell was the unit of life, because we could look no further than that. The technology gave us access to that, and it was an amazing technology. It changed the understanding of medicine from that day forward. Now we have a new technology that's going to take us on another journey, and this technology lets us look deep inside the cell, into the DNA itself, and to count and assess that DNA in a very deep way. Now we can see the genes that make up the genome. And the genes are only a small part of the genome, but they're very, very important. And each of those genes has a story to tell. And that is cool, because when you listen to someone's story, it's always interesting, right? Particularly if they've got more than one story, depending on who they're talking it to. And that's what genes are like. And when you bring a single gene and look at its story, that's sort of what we've been doing before the advent of being able to look at them all at once. But now we can see them all at once. We can hear something. The genes are not telling a story by themselves. They're singing, and they're singing in a chorus. And that chorus is orchestrated by a conductor. And the conductor is the genome itself. And the audience that watches that is you. We are watching that. The audience and the interplay between life around the genome is the performance. And what we're experiencing today is, for the first time, as we start genome medicine in Yorkshire, the ability to participate in and also learn about this audience participatory orchestra and chorus. So you have to think about the impact of a new cost for a technology. Here we have a well-air-conditioned car, and this car changed in price immediately the cost of family travel. The price drop was 10 times, and the technology sold in large numbers. And if you think about it, the genome sequencer is exactly the same kind of transformative technology. So now that technology has spread globally, and there are sequencing projects to sequence large numbers of people in order to learn more about that comparing you to the rest phenomenon. And that's occurring all over the world. I've just got back from Qatar, where they're planning to sequence 300,000 people. They've done 6,000. Here, we're hitting around 10,000 in the 100,000 Genome Project in UK. There's plans to do 1 million people in the States, et cetera, et cetera. Even the Faroe Islands are getting in on this, and they're sequencing everybody in the country, all 50,000 of them. By the end of this year, there will be 1 million human genomes in existence. There are a lot more than that. Excuse me, there are million sequenced human genomes, obviously. There's a lot more people than that. So what is this genome medicine? It's customized medical care to your body's unique genetic makeup. It allows us to understand your genome sequence in the context of everybody else's. It allows us to predict who will respond to a drug, potentially. We have to work hard on that, but we're already making progress. And it allows us to prevent you from becoming ill. Now that is cool. I'm working right now on a project with 40,000 subjects who are going to offer up their DNA. Already 1,000 of those subjects have, and they've all got sore knees. Just sore knees. Sore knees are pretty bad if you're my age, right? But what the point of that is, we'll be able to tell those subjects, based upon what we learn there, we'll be able to go out and tell prescribing physicians, based upon information they have from genomes of their patients, this person is going to have a problem with this part of their knee. Help them. So that's the idea. And patients themselves will be able to participate in their own networks of other patients, some of whom they find by virtue of the fact they know that patient has a disease, and some who the genomes of those people are linked together, and they're told, you are a member of this fraternity, whether you want to be or not, because you're likely to develop the following disease. This is cool stuff. It's kind of scary, but it's also kind of cool. So let's take a look at that. Who has a mutation in here that they know about? Just put your hand up. Some funky mutation. There you go. Somebody's brave enough to put up a hand. There's only 2 people in here who know about some genetic basis. Is that really true? I know. I've got plenty of mutations, believe me. Okay, I've had them looked at, and here you can see them. So up here is a survey that was performed by a company called 23andMe. You may have heard of them. And for £100, they'll take a look at your genome after you spit it into a bottle and send it off in the post. And what has come back is that I have a very high risk of prostate cancer, 24% of my lifetime. In my lifetime, I have a 24% chance of getting prostate cancer. I have a 14% chance of getting psoriasis. Guess what? I've got psoriasis, big time, okay? I don't know about the gallstones. I'm waiting for those. Mind you, moving to England, I'm pretty sure, no, I'll move on. Colorectal cancer, my father has died of that. And incidentally, you know, frequent scans are the way to address that, and that's what's happening. And there's not much I can do about my chances of chronic kidney disease. But the day I decided to believe this emphatically as being useful was the day it predicted that. And it's true, right? So this is the basic idea. There's a mutation that can tell you about yourself in a way you weren't expecting or that you do expect. There are plenty of companies out there offering all kinds of insightful analyses. Some are better than others, and one of the problems is that they serve things over the counter. You can pay, and they have different technologies, so those risks we saw, some of them are a bit off. Sometimes they predict or they don't predict. They conflict. We don't care. We know this technology will mature as you mature. And that's fantastic, because it means that you're the first generation, of those of you that are young, and the others of us will watch this happen and enjoy the beginnings of it, where we will see the fruits of this genome sequencing, and it will be amazing. I have a personal incentive to do this, because my sister has schizophrenia, and I really want to understand how she's impacted. So what we did is we had her spit into that bottle too. I'm not going to share the results with you except to say I didn't learn as much as I would have liked to, but there were some really interesting things that we're following up as a family. It's changed the way we interact with her. The threat is orthodoxy, long-held core beliefs. Long-held core beliefs make me miserable every day. They stop me getting grants. They stop so much. They can be useful, you know, you'll die if you jump off a cliff, etc. But what they do stop, in the main, is innovation. And we're in an innovation place that's amazing. There are some long-held beliefs that your Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, had about us in South Africa. Anyone who thinks the ANC is going to run South Africa is living in cloud cuckoo land. Well, I'm happy to be living there. And there are plenty of other people that have made aptly inappropriate predictions based upon their misunderstanding of technology and that which is occurring. But that's okay. That's what happens. So what does your GP think? Well, GPs are a funny breed. I've started to meet them here in this country, and they're all different. A couple of my friends are GPs. But the ones that I've inquired to or have heard of and discussed this concept have had some rather extreme ideas. Some are non-committal. Others have said this is a total can of worms. You don't want to go there. This is what they'll say to their patients. I would urge you to think very carefully about getting this sort of thing done. And we do not feel as a practice that we can take this on. Now, the last one actually is the most important one, because that is the state that we are in today. We're just beginning this journey, and the government wants us to complete the first phase of this journey by the end of 2017. That's not far. How are we going to train ourselves and all those GPs to think differently? Well, first of all, we have to show them. We have to show ourselves that this is a valuable endeavor. So let's think a little bit about that. If you think about Angelina Jolie, she has a family that has a very bad history of cancer and a family that has a set of mutations in the BRCA1 gene that have really been very bad news for her and her family members. And based upon a survey that she took of her own genome, she decided to have a double mastectomy, and she also decided more recently to have an ovarian resection. I think it's to take the ovaries out. And that's awful for her, but she's alive. And she wouldn't be doing this if she wasn't able to be aware of that information about that single gene. If she didn't know about it, she would never have thought about doing this. And if you think about that, it's a major incentive. Because what it tells us is if you're very sure that your risk is very high, the risk for her is 70%, 70, then you can take steps. You can do something to stay alive. Terry Pratchett, he died last year. He died of Alzheimer's. He had a mutation in his ABCA7 gene. Now, we know that. We couldn't do too much to help him, but at least knowledge of that earlier might have helped him ameliorate the process of the disease. I happen to work with a group, Rudy Tanzi's group at Harvard Med School, on Alzheimer's. In fact, I was speaking to this group a few minutes before I started this presentation with you, and we're looking at over 400 families who've had Alzheimer's, and we're looking at the whole genome sequences of their brains to see, can we tell genes that give an association with the disease? Can we learn more about it so we can develop new drugs by targeting those genes? So he was misdiagnosed as having a minor stroke in 2004. Had we known about his ABCA7 gene at that time, he would not have been misdiagnosed. And Ronnie Corbett, he died very recently of motor neuron disease. And I work on that particular disease a great deal at the Institute, Sheffield Institute for Translational Neuroscience. We suspect that he had a very bad mutation in that disease. And his diagnosis to death time was 18 months. Now, motor neurons are the longest genome in your body, and so the obvious joke is that his motor neurons were very stressed because he's short, but we don't know. So RIP. So another real fine aspect of this genome medicine story is that we're able to target drugs to the right people. Some people don't respond to certain drugs. And actually, it can be said that physicians are unwilling to tell their patients sometimes you won't respond to this because they need to give them hope. But on the other side of the coin, physicians really want to help people. So if they can find the right drug based upon your genome, they're going to go for it. And there's a huge expansion in this area in the drug industry. And at this university, we have a partner, Biogen, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that is driving us all very hard here to help them develop targeted drugs for Alzheimer's disease. So does genome medicine exist today? You bet it does. So here are a few examples. On the left-hand side, mostly are the names of genes, CCR5, CD20, VKO, HER2, and on the right are the names of drugs. If you have a CCR5 mutation, treatment with Maraviroc can help you. If you have a VKO, a mutation in the VKO gene, that can make you very susceptible to warfarin in such a way that you don't respond well to it, so you can know not to take that particular drug. If you have a mutation in the HER2 gene, that can really induce or prevent you from having breast cancer. But there's a treatment for that that specifically leverages that mutation in that particular gene for breast cancer, and it can really help you. And that's amazing. So if you're misfortunate enough, 1 in 6 of the females in this room will get breast cancer in their lifetimes. And I don't know how many of the males. Obviously, it's more prevalent in the females. But your chances of being treated well are much better if we know about that gene status. So let's hear a bit about what people are saying in the institutions. Here we have the NHS saying that the future of the NHS will be a personalized medicine service with genomics at its core. There's other stuff around genomics I'll mention in a moment, but really it's genomics is going to give us the path because it's absolute. You either have a mutation or you don't. So NHS England has adopted this to tailor quickly and efficiently. But experts in the field have stated, such as Jeff Ginsburg at Duke, Most health systems around the world are not fit to shepherd genome sciences into routine healthcare. And he's right. He's absolutely right. So we've got a big challenge here in the UK, and particularly in England with the NHS, to train to change that, to transform the way we think and do with NHS. And I'm so excited that the genome medicine folks that are from Sheffield and over from Leeds, because it's one centre, have come around here today to talk to you and give you an insight into just what it is they're doing, because they are real pioneers and we need to support them. So the paradigm shift is that the UK is undertaking genome at a national level, genome medicine at a national level. It's one of the first in the world to do that. It's the first Western industrialized nation to really go for it. It's a vanguard. It's amazing. It's exciting. Will it work? We don't know, but the chances of it working are high because everybody that I'm working with in this are totally dedicated. It's going to look at rare diseases and cancers. You can hear a lot more about that, but I just wanted to give you an idea. Here you can see the way things are collected. There's lots of samples. There's a percentage of population that are affected. The usual sorts of stuff that you have to understand before you choose to work on a particular rare disease. But the one cool thing for me, as a person who works with electronic stuff, is that this project will join up the dots. At the end of this, nearly 100,000 patients will be in the same database, and their clinical records, very deeply explained, will be in that database, accessible by responsible processes to thousands of clinicians who can share and look at the same record. And that will be a first for the UK. So the educators are worried. And the reason we're worried is that we need to teach people how to do this stuff. Some of us know a lot about that. I'm fortunate in that I do. And we're running programs to help teach people. And the people we're teaching are the physicians, the nurses, the technicians, and also the research scientists. It's a really motivated group of people, but we're trying to train people such as yourself to understand this so that we can exploit this wonderful new resource. So, we have to deliver on the promise. The engine for the NHS transformation are the genome medicine centres, which you can hear about a lot about. And what's already happening as a result of this project is that better quality information is now available without as many mistakes. It's cleaner, it's better for patients which are in the system. Cancer tumour samples are being collected more appropriately, driving changes in the way we do pathology. And as I said, as a scientist who works on this kind of stuff, centralized, shareable records. That's the same as a jam cake and a cup of tea, let me tell you. Nothing better at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I don't want to tell my patient they have no chance. Who does? This genomic stuff isn't important to my way of doing medicine. That's okay. But we have to think about changing it from a short-term idea into something which is real. And to do that, we need to educate the workforce. This is going to accelerate human genome discoveries in genetic testing, in new treatment guidelines, and in new predictions. Those are going to be the first things that occur. The next thing that's going to follow up are going to be new targeted drugs. We're going to have value-based medicine, where it's possible for us to say to you, as opposed to you, look, this is going to work for you, and it's going to keep you alive for the rest of your life. And I'm sorry, it's not worth you taking this drug. The first recruit, as we heard a moment ago, was recruited last week into this program. I was very excited to hear that, and that's why today, for me, is such a watershed. And happening right now is something in concurrency with that. It's called Health North, part of the rejuvenation of the North that the government is employing. And that has allowed us to connect information to cities and between cities. And that's allowing us to work together to solve the problems across Yorkshire in this genome medicine arena. So we're running a master's program in this, and I always plug it because obviously there might be a student in the audience who's thinking of transforming their lives and the lives of others. But with that judicious plug out of the way, I just want to say cool stuff can happen, okay? So tweet that if you don't mind. Cool stuff can happen. Genome sequencing will be available for anyone who wants it in this country. Okay? There will be interactive, real-time wellness apps which say to you, you might want to go in to see the GP about. That app already exists in the US. We're going to have it here. The NHS will sneak it into us some way. There's going to be a huge drop in cancers because we're going to know a lot more about what influences them in our lifestyle, and huge increases in the quality of life. Real ones, tangible ones, we can measure and see. And there'll be a healthier, fitter you. What's not to like? Thank you.
We have a short section here for questions to Win. We're having a more general panel discussion at the end, but if anybody's got any burning issues, if you could just put your hand up.
Quite often people will say, well, you know, my father lived to 90 and he smoked up to 25 packs every day. So you can come back with a metric that says, yes, but you've got a 75% chance of dying from it in the next, and given the information I have on you medically, this is your chance. And here is new information about your lifestyle and the fact you don't walk and the numbers and everything. You will die of cancer by the age of 37 if you don't stop today. However, you know, it's your choice. You're going to be able to give much more information that's much more accurate. That's the only counter I have to that argument, which I hear very often. It's a very powerful one. The other is that the way people are told things will be interactive. Every time you lift for a cigarette, you might get a nudge. And when you can see the facts, when there's a measure, there's a graph which shows how much worse you're getting every day, you actually can see it. It's not a silent killer. It's not one that makes you cough in the morning because it's with you all the time. There's going to be a lot more wellness coverage than you imagine. The NHS does do things to prevent illness already, if to my understanding, because I'm not a member of the NHS, but certainly I see that in my daily life. And I really think that if there's evidence, which we're building right now, not only from genome data, which is the easy one in a sense because it's got numbers to it, you can see, you can count the A's, the C's, the T's, and the G's, but if you move to collecting lifestyle information and putting that together with genome, that's very powerful. That's very powerful indeed. I see a day where you will visit a nurse once a year, or she'll visit you, or maybe you do it via an app, and you'll have your wellness consultation. And that person will have a lot of information about your general lifestyle after you've told them about what you do specifically, and they'll be able to say, you know, you might want to stop seeing that guy Jim. He's a bad influence on you because he's got this kind of lifestyle which is making you do these things. His friends have this. Or you might say to you, these are your, he or she might say to you, these are the ways that you can change your lifestyle just marginally to really improve your chances of not getting the following diseases. And that information, I think, is collected in real time and then percolated, or it's done, or it can be done in real time back. The point I'm trying to make is that I'm absolutely sure there will be interventions, as we call them, to help you live a better lifestyle, and they will include, if necessary, things which are, you know, like drugs or surgery. Okay. Thank you very much.
Just a very short commercial break for the GMC. Genomic Medicine Centres, there are 13 of them in England, have been commissioned by NHS England, and very shortly going to be joined by Scotland and Northern Ireland, and unfortunately, at the moment, Wales doesn't have enough money to join. I know from knowing a little bit about Scottish politics that Scotland signing up to something that's got England in the name suggests that this is probably really important. So I think that's probably one of the biggest commendations we could have, that Nicola Sturgeon seems to have signed in the dotted line and Scotland's going to be joining. The mission of the GMC is to do two things, and some of them have been alluded to by Win. They have to deliver the 100,000 genome project and effect an NHS transformation in the process. Now, the 100,000 genome project has got two components to it. It's looking at inherited genetic disorders. Some of these are called rare genetic diseases. Actually, collectively, they're not rare. There's supposedly about 3 million people affected by these in the UK. And although I'm not a geneticist, I've been amazed, actually, people who know acquaintances phoning me up and saying, well, actually, a member of my family's got this or that. And so there are very large numbers of people have a very large number of uncommon disorders, which this part of the programme is attempting to elucidate the mechanisms and the underlying genetic abnormalities which cause people to have these conditions. The second is cancer, and some of you may ask, what's that got to do with genetics? Well, cancer is actually acquired genetics. So you start off with a genome which you've inherited from your parents. If that genome becomes corrupted, if the information that's transmitted from that genome to the cell goes wrong, that's when you can potentially generate a cancer cell. And so that component of the project is attempting again to look at the mechanisms underlying cancer and importantly to develop new treatments. Although this looks like a research project, it's actually, I suppose, quite a blunt instrument that the NHS are using to transform practice. And again, Win has alluded to some of the ways in which this will be done. It's effectively setting up the systems and testing them for what the future of genomic medicine will look like how specimens are collected, how they're processed, how the information is fed back to patients and clinicians. That is really quite a tall order, but that's one of the major outcomes that will come out of the 100,000 Genome Project. But even more importantly than that, what this is trying to do is to create familiarity among clinicians and patients to what this means, how this can transform their practice, and how it can provide better health care for patients, because that really is what it's all about. And thirdly, which hopefully evenings like this will help to do, is to develop confidence and awareness among the community at large about what this is about and why it's a good thing and not something to be feared or to be worried about. So that's what the Genomic Medicine Centres are about. It's about these two things. One, setting up these pathways, collecting data, which will be valuable and useful in itself, but also affecting this transformation in the NHS at the same time through people's participation in the project. So, without any further ado, hand over to the next speaker, was Jim Catto. He's a surgeon from Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, a urological surgeon for about bladder and prostate cancer, and he's one of the clinical leads for cancer in the Yorkshire and Humber GMC, and is going to talk about the clinical impact, presumably from cancer point of view, of the project. So hand over now to Jim.
So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and very hard to follow Andrew presenting such a clear explanation and Wynn's fantastic talk. I've actually just checked 23andMe, and I will send my sputum off to see if I share your baldness gene or not. So this is a very important picture in science. This is Earthrise in 1968, taken from the Apollo 8 space mission. And this was the first time human beings had ever seen the Earth back on itself. And it was a truly inspirational bit. And it really heralded the beginning. Well, it heralded an achievement to get people onto and around the moon, but it heralded the beginning of space exploration. And there are a couple of things I think are important in this for this talk today. Firstly, we are at a similar dawn, as Wynn has alluded to, that we are about to unlock a genomic exploration that we've not had before. We've really been looking currently under the lights in a dark road, and we haven't really been able to see beyond that level, and we're about to. And secondly, it shows the changes in technology. So the computing power that took this spaceship and the astronauts around the moon is minuscule compared to what we have today. So your iPhone has about 2,000 times as greater computing power as that machine had, and that's just a small fragment of the exploration and explanation we've seen. There's a thing called Moore's law, which is about the computing power increases you see over time. And this law has held true for a long time. It predicts that every 18 months technology will double. The speed of your computer capacitor will double. And that's happened. And as a consequence, we are now in an exponential phase in technology expansion. And we're very lucky to be living in this time. But this is now allowing us to do things that we never could do before, as Wynn has said. It's allowed us to speed up things. So the first genomic sequencing was done by a very laborious fashion. A very small subbacteria was sequenced in 1977. The first proper organism, a yeast, it was in 1994. Again, it was teams of labs working together using very laborious technology for a long time. 2003, so 13 years ago, it was the first genome. It took 13 years to sequence, and it cost nearly $4 billion. It was a huge effort around the world. Labs churning away with very rudimentary technology to how we compare it today. Now we can almost do a genome a day. The technology has moved so fast that we can do that. With that, the cost has plummeted. So here you see the cost of a genome sequence, and it's now plummeted to about $1,000 or less for a single genome. That's the machine capacity to turn stuff through. And as a consequence, we've got a lot more information. And as a scientist, I enjoy this information. So as Andrew's alluded to, I'm a urologist, so I spend a lot of my life dealing with the prostate. We can now look at genome browsers on the internet. We can find things you want. So here we are looking at my favorite gene, which for those in the audience don't know, it's PSA. So one of those prostate genes. I can look at its isoforms, I can look at how it's constructed, I can look at its sequence, I can see it's conserved in some animals but not others. So here you see conservation, it's in monkeys, mice, dogs, elephants, but it's not in the fish because they have a different sexual reproductive fashion. I can even see that it was present in Neanderthals, which is just amazing in nowadays that you can do such a level of information. And it's just truly mind-blowing. And this is all free on the internet for access. So science has offered us this as discovery, but it is now going to change medicine, and that's as Wynn's alluded to. We've really been on a paradigm for as long as medicine's been around, whereby it's been about better tools to identify the disease through symptomatology. And here we see a very famous Dutch physician listening to the chest of someone with tuberculosis. Not long after that, the rudimentary stethoscope came along, and then the modern-day stethoscope. If we go into the 19th century, we saw epidemiology coming, and this is about the cholera outbreak where John Snow worked out it was the pumps in water, took away the pump and showed it, and it was the cholera cases in black around the Broad Street pump. So this was the beginning of epidemiology, but still being reactive to symptomatology. In the 20th century, just at the end of the 19th century, Röntgen discovered and described X-rays, and there you can see one of the first ever X-rays he took of his hand. And within 100 years, we had multi-parametric MRI, we had various different formats of CT, and we could peer into the body in a better way than ever before. So it was all about better imaging and better diagnostics. And I think the 21st century is going to be about drilling even smaller, as Wynne says, even faster, even deeper down into the microscope. And I think there are going to be three things that really characterize this genomic medicine. It's going to be the power of diagnostics, it's going to be the speed that we can accelerate treatment, and it's going to be the disconnect that we've had of diagnosis and treatment. They're going to become one, they're going to be joined together. So, an example of power. These machines can drill down and show far more detail and far more powerful analysis of traditional samples than ever before. So if we take a pregnant mother, there is a risk that the baby may have a congenital syndrome or an anomaly. Currently, we predict something like Down syndrome from a blood test of the mother where we're looking at a range of embryonic reactionary hormones and proteins. We estimate the Down risk. The mother then undergoes an invasive procedure where a needle is put into the uterus to try and aspirate some cells to see if we can check that. But we've known for a long time that the baby's cells will leach into the bloodstream. And if only you had a better diagnostic test, you could somehow drill down. And of course, that's where sequencing comes in. We can now take a simple blood test from the mother and detect the baby's genome within the mother, and do that now commercially and avoid all the previous risks and all the worries and all the trauma of that. The previous tests were looking at one condition, now you can look at a number of conditions. So that power will give us a safer, faster, more reliable test. Speed is important. This is a karyotype, so Ann Dalton, our next speaker, will tell you all about this. For those of you in the audience who don't know, this is the human genome, this is the human karyotype. We should have 2 copies of everything. I'm sure you've all got it, but there we go. We have 3 for number 21, which is Down syndrome, trisomy. This takes time. This is laborious technology to turn around. And there are many conditions in medicine where you don't have time to turn this round, or you're uncertain. We now have publications of very rapid turnaround, 50 hours to turn around babies who are born where we don't know the syndrome. There are major problems. We don't understand what to do. We don't know the long-term prognosis. We don't know the life expectancy. All this information is extremely vital and extremely precious to new parents. And we can now do this in 50 hours. And there'll be in many number of clinical syndromes where this symptoms will be extremely useful, this rapid turnaround. And then we can change this paradigm. So as Wynne has alluded to, medicine to date has been about diagnosing a disease and symptoms. And then we make a best guess about treatment. So we know from 100 other people roughly what should work. But genomics and the modern technology hopefully are going to link treatment to diagnosis. And I have a good example of this, of MRSA. So you all know that in hospitals, infections carry on and get cross-contaminated. And one of the plagues of modern medicine are these multi-resistant organisms like MRSA. And if you catch these in hospital, it can really affect your recovery. So this is an experiment, this is an observational study that was done in a newborn baby, a neonatal premature intensive care unit, whereby babies are routinely swabbed to see if they're carrying one of these bugs. And so what we see here is baby 1 turns out to be positive for this bug at birth. It's tested repeatedly, has a negative test a few days later, probably because the specimen missed the MRSA rather than it wasn't there, but then again it turns positive. About a week or so later, a couple of weeks later, there's an MRSA outbreak on the unit, and a bunch of other babies start carrying this same MRSA. So by doing this investigation, which is really a modern-day equivalent of the cholera outbreak investigation, we can see where the MRSA came from, we can understand more about how it got crossed around the unit, work out something about the spread and to try and prevent this happening in the future. But we can also move forward. So currently, when you take that swab, you send it off to the lab, they plate it out on an agar gel, they let the bacteria grow, which are the yellow things here. They have a number of antibiotic capsules on the gel, and where the antibiotic kills the bacteria, which you can see is the halos, then we know that that bacteria is sensitive to that drug. It takes a couple of days. So in that couple of days, we've had a best guess where we've been treating them perhaps with this antibiotic, which they're resistant to, thus leading to wastage and more antibiotic resistance. May have picked the right one, we don't know. But with genomic sequencing, we can now sequence that bacteria and find out which resistant genes it's carrying. We know it's resistant to penicillin, methicillin, flucloxacillin, so we'll pick another one. And all of that can happen in real time in a useful fashion. So that's going to make a massive impact on modern care. I'm going to show you some stuff about cancer now, but this will be what drives it, because this directly improves your clinical care in a very short space of time. And then if we go to cancer, which is the panacea that we all want, currently cancer treatments are stratified around location and type. Have you got lung cancer? Is it this type of lung cancer? Right, well, we know from 100 other patients that it tends to respond to surgery and radiotherapy, so we'll use that. But of course, genomics is going to change that. The first real example of the potential of this came in with a drug called Gleevec. Gleevec was discovered and driven to react to or to treat a relatively common condition called chronic myeloid leukemia, and I'm very nervous of speaking about this in front of Andrew as an expert in this field, whereby they had a fusion of these two genes to create a novel oncogene that was driving the cancer forward. Having understood the structure of this fusion protein here, we could then create a molecule that blocked the binding site, so-called Gleevec, and therefore could block the cancer dead in its steps. And we saw good improvements of that. We then saw that you could apply that to other tumours, and we saw similar responses elsewhere. With lung cancer, we have another example. So lung cancer on the outside looks like a single condition. If you break it down, actually, it's a group of different sorts of diseases. If you break those down further, you find that a number of them have got different mutation profiles. So here you see different genes that are mutated in different extents in effectively the same cancer in the same organ, but completely different profiles. And now we are starting to have drugs that will target each of these genes individually. So here's a young 48-year-old female with lung cancer. What we're looking at is the lungs, and what we're looking at is the progression of their disease. They've had chemotherapy. The tumours have not responded to chemotherapy, so this increasing white area here is the cancer growing, cancer becoming more aggressive despite the traditional area. We have a new spread lesion down here that's causing problems. If you sequence that, you find they have a mutation in EGFR, which is one of the drivers of growth factors, and you can now treat them with an EGFR inhibitor to get an immediate response. We have another example with a different agent, a different mutation pattern called ALK, and again, a targeting mutation. So we know that by better understanding cancer, we can now start coming up with more personalized treatments. And that really is the goal that awaits us. Cancer is complex. Again, we're now understanding this better. We used to think cancer was one disease. You've got this one cell, it caused cancer, it spread. We now realize that each cancer has hundreds of different cells in it. Each one will be driving different diseases. And if you knock off the green cells, then the orange ones will proliferate, likewise blue, likewise red, likewise purple. And as a consequence, we're now getting better treatments to respond to even those. So this is the original study of Gleevec. The drugs that respond, the tumours that respond are the myeloid ones in the top, and see how their survival, this is patient survival, is better than the ones that don't respond. But even then, eventually the cancer learns to live despite Gleevec and grows further. But we now know from these people who lived despite all of that change, we can now map their genome and work out why did they manage to survive, what was different to them in the long term. And as a consequence of that, we've now worked out second drugs that can go on and inhibit the Gleevec responders or refractory population downstream. So the biology responders will become more and more important over time. So I think in general at the moment, this is what the situation looks like in much of medicine. We have a very thin veneer of people who've got targeted specific agents that have an excellent response. And we have big program calls around the world to try and identify these people to understand better. But unfortunately, this is still a huge population where perhaps genomics isn't making a big difference. But, you know, this is the beginning. We are starting that space exploration. When people went to the moon, they didn't have any vision that where we would end up. I perform robotic surgery. I perform robotic surgery using a machine that has the space shuttle robotic arms that were developed for a completely different purpose, but now has a fantastic purpose in human beings. So we don't know where we're going to end up, but it's going to be a great journey to go together. And I think those of you who are young in the audience, you're going to live in a wonderful lifetime. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to put a very slightly different spin on this because I work for the NHS and I solely work for the NHS, and my focus links back to the question that lady asked earlier on about, is the NHS going to pay? Well, the NHS is a great institution because it's owned by all of us. It's supported by all of us as taxpayers. And so we, as a group, as a nation, have an ownership and a responsibility towards the NHS to make this amazing programme work. So we've kind of laid out all the exciting things that we can do, but now I'm going to put the onus back on you as to all the things that you've got to do. So it'll be an interesting debate at the end as to whether actually really personalised medicine is for you, or whether actually we're a little bit further away from that. So this is an idea of what the future could look like. And bearing in mind that the disorders that we're talking about in terms of rare diseases are things that perhaps we want to not have children affected with, or that we want to be able to cure them of, or that we want to be able to live to our old age with appropriate therapies, or we have genetic disorders that are acquired and they are cancerous disorders where the genome is changing in the cells. And what we want to be able to do is to have this, if you like, idealised life cycle in the future. And so we can kind of start anywhere, but if I start at that ball of cells on the top left with the initials PIGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. This is where we can actually identify the cause of a genetic disorder, or rather identify whether somebody is suffering from a genetic disorder at the embryo stage, so that we can actually not implant an affected embryo. We can select an embryo that is unaffected. The critical thing about PIGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, is we have to know what it is that we're looking for, both in terms of the disorder and in terms of the causative mutation. We can also then have a look, as Jim explained, slightly later on in the pregnancy, when we've actually got a current pregnancy. And whereas before we had to do an invasive test into the uterus, we had to put a needle into a pregnant lady and draw off amniotic fluid. Now we don't have to do that, and we can do what's called non-invasive prenatal testing, NIPT, or non-invasive prenatal diagnosis, NIPD. But both of them are reliant on this new technology. Both of them have the potential for us to have a higher chance of having a healthy child. You can never guarantee that your child will be healthy, because there are lots of things that can go wrong that are not anything to do with genetics. But where there is a genetic cause for a problem, we can hopefully identify it. But again, there is a decision that's going to have to be made that if you have that intervention after you've implanted an embryo, if you are going to then not have that child, then you have to have a termination at some stage in that pregnancy. And that is a challenge for any woman. You can then go and look at whether there is a genetic disorder, a rare disease, in your newborn baby, newborn screening, NBS. And we do newborn screening in this country for 9 disorders at the moment, of which 8 are genetic in origin. And we are able to detect them and to identify the cause and feed that information back into the family. And so potentially, if you have an affected child, then you may have the choice later with subsequent children of whether you have another affected child or not. We've then, if we've identified that child, we're in the position where maybe we can offer some real therapy, maybe some stem cell therapy, where you're actually changing the genetic makeup of that individual in the tissue that is affected by the genetic disorder. And this is all technology that's starting to happen, it's starting to be available. But there's a whole series of choices associated with that we as the public, as patients, are going to have to make. And then as we grow older, we're going to be exposed to carcinogens, we're going to be vulnerable to different types of cancer, and 1 in 3 of us will be developing cancer. So this is a very important issue for all of us. And we're going to be in the position where we will know more about whether we're at risk of cancer, but we're also going to have to engage in whether we're going to be screened for cancer or not. Because for the vast majority of changes that we see associated with your genome that you inherit that give you a higher risk of cancer, it's a higher risk. It isn't a diagnosis. So there is a potential here of being told that you are at very high risk, like Angelina Jolie was, but it doesn't say she is definitely going to get cancer. She's just got a very high risk. She can choose to have surgery and intervention, or she can choose to take her chance. And she is a patient, a member of the public, like all of us. And so every time she makes a decision either to take her chance or to have the intervention, she's, in a sense, drawing on the NHS, engaging with the NHS, and she's changing whether this is beneficial or not, but she's making a choice. So one of the key things that we're going to get out of this is we're going to have more choice. So in the idealized world, we have this future where we can make choices around genetic disorders, both those that we inherit and those that we develop. And ideally, we want to slide off into that glorious old age that I envisage myself, where I will be paddling with my partner, hopefully not quite as bent over as that, because I shall keep exercising. And what we will have in order to maintain our health and well-being is we will have a whole variety of technology that will help and support us remain well. And coming back to what Wynne was saying about preventing you being ill, this technology will be able to help you remain well. It will identify whether you are moving around as much as you should. It will identify whether you are eating what you should. It will identify whether your point of care testing, where you measure your blood pressure, you measure components in your blood, and you can all do this either in your local pharmacy or you can do it in your home, and it will all monitor and measure what you're doing. But we as a population, as a public, have to engage and accept that that is there and that we have to be monitored in order for it to deliver that benefit. If we don't get screened, we don't know. So I'm asking the question all about this personalised medicine. Is it actually for us? Rather than is it just for me? I can make the decision and say, yes, I want it. But is it actually for us as a society? Because as I'm going to explain, there is a society implication here. There is a society choice that we're going to make. So personalised medicine is all about healthcare tailored for me. It's very kind of egocentric. It's saying, I want to have my healthcare that does exactly what I need and want. And it's recognising that one size, shape, colour of healthcare does not fit all. We're all very different and we all have very different needs. We will know far more about our needs, but we will all have different choices to make and different needs to be serviced by our wonderful NHS. So if we come to that nitty-gritty problem that we all know about, which is actually about cost. And in this age of austerity, we do have to think about cost, and we're always hearing about how the NHS has got to make efficiencies and savings. And at present time, at this point in time, if we accept what the need is for rare diseases, if we understand that 1 in 17 of us have a rare disease and that we can identify that rare disease, the genetic cause of it, potentially by sequencing in about 80% of those rare diseases, the current state of play is that it will cost 500 million to do that genetic testing. Recognising that in the future that cost will come down, but the need, the demand, the requirement will go up. Every year for each birth cohort, it will cost 37 million to do that sequencing. So that's 37 million that we're not spending on other things. So you could kind of reframe that picture of this is an output from a whole genome sequencer or from one of the big next generation sequencers, that actually it's not so much A, C, G, and T, it's more a row of pound signs. And there's a lot of money being invested in this technology and in the use of this technology. And that does not include cancer. And cancer is the big spend. We know what the limits are of rare diseases. We know that there's not going to be much more than 1 in 17 of us. But for cancer, 1 in 3 of us, all of those different types of cancers, and we can sequence at all points in the development of that disease, from even subclinical, preclinical manifestations of cancer through to end-stage disease. So, if we start to think about the implications for, let's say, rare diseases, cystic fibrosis is a more common rare disease. And over recent years, new drugs have come online for cystic fibrosis. And one of the first drugs that was a specific drug for cystic fibrosis, i.e. was targeted at one of the mutations associated with cystic fibrosis, G551D, is a drug called ivacaftor. At present cost, it costs £189,000 per patient per annum. But fortunately, there's very few patients who have that mutation. At some point, that drug will move out of patent and it will become a lot cheaper, but at the moment, it's extremely expensive. So what cost to society? Do we say it's too expensive, or do we say it actually benefits us? It benefits that small group of patients who can improve on that drug. Therefore, they don't demand of our NHS so much because they are being treated and they are well, and they're contributing to society and they're paying their taxes. So that drug, it has been assessed by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence and says, yes, we will fund that because it is worth it. As a society, we have signed up for it. But unfortunately, that's not true necessarily of all drugs, that we all sign up for them. And there is another drug coming online for cystic fibrosis called sumacaftor, which is under consideration by NICE at the moment, and that costs at the moment $259,000 per patient per annum. I don't know what the pound cost will be because it hasn't been approved. So there is an almost limitless capacity at the moment for drugs for rare disease. So coming back to cancer and the disorder that Jim mentioned about chronic myeloid leukemia, this is a miracle. For patients who have got or who have had chronic myeloid leukemia, this is the closest thing to a cure for many of those patients. And it doesn't involve a bone marrow transplant. It involves taking a drug. Unfortunately, the drug, imatinib, Gleevec, does not work for all patients. And over time, a proportion of patients, about 10%, will start to relapse on the drug. And so there are other drugs that have been developed, dasatinib, for example, that can be then employed. And then other drugs after that, once dasatinib fails. So you have nilotinib coming along. And so essentially we have costolistinibs. They are very, very expensive drugs. And they are cumulative because the wonderful thing about these drugs is that they cure patients. But the big unfortunate thing about these drugs is the patient has to keep taking them. So from a pharmaceutical point of view, from a pharma company point of view, they are the perfect drug because they cure the patient wants to take them, but they have to keep on taking them, and the cost remains and accumulates. So there is a huge question that we have to ask, is how and why and what are we going to spend our money on? There is some hope in this. It's not just about huge cost. there is a particular mutation in a particular gene, CUR6.2, that is associated with neonatal diabetes, and it is the most common cause of neonatal diabetes. And some bright spark had a good think about what that particular gene was doing, and just raised a question as to whether something that worked on ion channels could actually have a remedial effect and could actually do the required thing, which is close the channel and cure the patient. And fortunately, the drug sulfonylurea is as cheap as chips. You can buy it by the bucket load. So there is the potential for drugs that we have developed and that we're using to be able to treat genetic disorders, rare diseases in particular cases, and actually deliver a cure for a patient. In this particular situation, a child with neonatal diabetes does not need to have insulin injections. They just need to take a tablet. And that's a huge step forward for that patient. So I'd like to just leave you with a thought about this future again and what it might look like and what your responsibilities are as patients and what decisions you're going to have to make. And I'm going to put onto this some things that are a little bit more relevant to our society today. So we have the highest teenage pregnancy rate in Europe. And though intrinsically there is nothing wrong with a pregnant teenager, unfortunately pregnant teenagers don't engage with the health services as well as they should or might, not early enough. So some of the decisions that could be taken early on in those pregnancies may not be available to that teenager. So there is a huge amount of education that we need to think about. We're looking at identifying illness in children, and we have significant child poverty and deprivation. And treating the genetic cause of a child's illness may be relevant to a child who would otherwise be well, but we also have to put that into the context of what else is going to affect that child. And poverty and deprivation are not good for your health. In terms of how we engage with our clinicians and our treatment, one thing that we're really, really bad at is actually taking the medicine when we're supposed to, particularly if the medicine has nasty side effects. And what we tend to do is we tend to stop because we don't like it. And so our adherence to treatment regimes can be quite poor, even when we have serious diseases. So when we start to look at how we live our life, one of the things that we know that we've got as we progress towards the end of it is we have an awful lot of comorbidities, some of which we contribute to ourselves, such as smoking, such as obesity. And so that we as a society have to own this. It is the most exciting project that, from working in human genetics for 33 years, I could have ever envisaged. It will open doors for patients that we couldn't imagine even 5 years ago. It will transform and drive medicine if we let it. It will transform and drive the NHS if we make it. But we as a society, we as patients, we as the public have to really understand the challenge around this, how we have a responsibility in this. Thank you.
Heard a lot about personalised medicine, and this really is a revolution in healthcare. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say this is moving from a corner shop to Amazon. And I heard it described more eloquently last week, actually, saying this is moving medicine from an age of artisans to the modern age. To try and summarise what you've been hearing, really, I suppose there's what 100,000 Genome Project and many other things are doing is generating a large data set, contains genomic data, but a lot of lifestyle data. Some people have suggested things like Fitbits will automatically transmit to the database, things like that. At the core of this, though, if this is ever going to be used, there needs to be tools developed that will bring that information back to looking after the individual person. And that's almost where the Amazon bit comes in, because these tools are a bit like when you go onto Amazon and it says you would like to buy this, wouldn't you? It's the same kinds of maths and the same kinds of tools that will be required to take the genomic data and the population data back to the individual patient. And the personalised medicine agenda, as you've heard, is about accurate diagnosis, individualised risk and prevention, prognosis and targeted therapies, which all the previous speakers have mentioned. The last point I'm going to make is who's actually going to provide this? Now, the NHS is putting a lot of money into this, and at a meeting last week, Gill and I heard that Mr. Osborne was chipping in another 250 million. So why is the UK government doing this? Well, the NHS has got a magic ingredient here, and that's what it is. It's your NHS number. And that allows large data sets to be linked together. Genomic data, your personal records from your GP, from hospitals, to provide this metadata that allows the genomic data to make sense and to be applied to the future care of other patients. People may have misgivings about this, and this is what we want to hear about. But no other healthcare system in the world has that magic ingredient. And so the government's putting all this cash into it because it sees this project as giving the UK, not just the health service, but the industrial and commercial side of the UK, a big competitive advantage. So the NHS are a big player in this, but there's also consumer genomics. I was stunned a couple of weeks ago when discussing prenatal diagnosis for one of the obstetricians to say, but Mothercare and Crown Point and Leeds are already providing this. And they are. It wasn't a wind-up. Looked on their website, and Mothercare does indeed provide genomic services. Wyn Hyde mentioned 23andMe, which anybody can do. Super drug promote this. You can go in there and buy gift vouchers for all the family. So genetics is becoming a consumer product. And this was summed up by one of my genetics colleagues in Leeds, who, when asked how genetic patients will present in the future, he said they'll present with a memory stick. So it won't be a case of coming to the doctor. They will come to the doctor with the information already there. So there's a lot to think about, and the benefit of having events like this is that we sometimes exist in a bit of a bubble, so we really want to hear what everybody in the audience thinks about all this. Would you have your own genome sequenced, and what questions you have for a panel sitting in front of you? So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want, because we really want to try and understand what the wider community think about all this stuff. We have enthusiasts, but maybe not everybody is, so please go ahead and ask some questions.
We know that the tabloids killed care.data because people were terrified of this notion of a big database with all that information on being shared. How do we know that this information isn't going to fall into the hands of the insurance companies and our premiums will go up because we're susceptible to certain diseases and they won't insure us any longer?
In terms of whether it will fall into other people's hands, there is already a commitment and a consent with the 100,000 Genomes project for that data to be shared, and that's a fundamental part of the consent that you sign. Will it fall into the hands of the insurance companies? I don't think anybody can ever guarantee about data once it gets out there. I think the important thing about the UK is that we have healthcare provided at the point of need, and the insurance companies are not in a position to discriminate against you on the basis of your genetic makeup and the basis of this testing. But I don't think there are any guarantees in this. I think there are some huge challenges as a society as to how we think about these data. I myself, I think, would be willing to share the data, but I'm not sure about the entire circumstances of that. So it's a very difficult question. But I don't think there are any guarantees.
Actually, when you sign up for this, you don't just agree for your genome data to be shared, you agree for your genome data to be sold to commercial companies by the government, admittedly in an apparently anonymous fashion, but I understand that this has already raised concerns amongst patient self-help groups and so on, which I have to say I can at least understand.
I would certainly agree with you that those concerns are entirely understandable. part of the purpose of this project is to look at how we can, as UK PLC, develop our biotechnology and our pharma capacity and capability. And one of the things that I think is very true is that this has happened in the past in a very informal, unconsented way, and this is actually where we are going into it with our eyes open, and I think that's a very important distinction. I think the other thing that is equally important in this project is thinking about the transformation. And the transformation isn't just about the NHS doing things differently. It's about us as a society, as a public, as patients, thinking about these data differently, thinking about what we do and don't want to do with it, thinking about what choices we do and don't have, and making decisions, engaging with the process, not seeing it as something that is somebody else's responsibility. It is our genome, and we have an engagement and involvement in it. I think there is there will always be a range of people. There will be people who are keen to have information. When they engage with the doctor, what they want to know is, what is wrong with me, doctor? I want to know everything about it. And as soon as they leave the doctor's surgery, they go and Google it. To the other extreme, where people want the doctor to tell them what it is that's wrong, or not even that sometimes. They just want to be told, take this and it will make you better. And both of those positions and everything in between is correct and right, because it's correct and right for that person. We as a society have to work out how we're going to make this project personalise healthcare and allow people those choices. And I think it's really good from that point of view, because it's hauling all of these things out and saying, we need to think about this. Not an answer, but a process.
Can you tell me how this is going to be implemented in GP surgeries relating to the costs that it could bring? You know, are GPs going to be happy to go along with this?
The issue is probably not going to be the cost of sequencing, because several people have shown that graph on the way down. The real problem is how you use the data, how you use the information. And one thing which I think has been glossed over slightly tonight is that all of these investigations give you a probability that something's going to happen to you. And in my experience, humans are not very good at probability. So there is a really big communication issue about what this means and how you use it. Anybody else like to comment on that question?
One of the key elements of the project is education. And we are reaching out not only to clinicians in the tertiary hospitals and in the specialised services, but we're also reaching out to GPs and to hospitals across the region in terms of the district general hospitals and into GP surgeries, to all members of the healthcare community, because it is very important that the understanding of what is happening is disseminated throughout. There are opportunities for education, like, for example, the Masters in Genomic Medicine. That is being funded and supported by Health Education England for members of the NHS. So you can get bursaries to go on the Master's course, and it has one of those entrances and exits all over the course, so you can take bits of it, you can acquire different qualifications. Events like this are about education. They're about engaging with patients and the public, so that when you go back to your GP, you're raising questions about what is happening, about the project, so that their awareness of it is increased, because they recognise that their patients are much more aware of genetics and genomics. It is not, there's not a kind of magic bullet, because we simply have so many people to reach, 1.4 million being employed in the NHS, and the populations that we serve, 53 million in England alone. And that level of education is huge. Part of the funding that we have is for education and training as part of the GMC, and that is money that will be used to disseminate information. but very much we are dependent on the patients and the public engaging. Critical is the public and patient engagement to this.
Following on from that, following on from that just a little bit, in terms of looking to the future and future funding and how that fits in the model of healthcare delivery, as everybody said, this is an NHS transformational project, and working alongside that is looking at models for future delivery and funding of future delivery. So assessment of the costs is being done at the same time by NHS England, and looking at how the model can be taken into the future and provide this sort of diagnostic testing for people in the future. And it's quite likely, of course, that alongside that, some of the other methods of testing that we're using now may be superseded by this. So there'll be a balancing of some of the costs. But all that, you're absolutely right, needs to be assessed in the context of, okay, this is great, this is going to provide future genomic delivery of services for diagnostics and ongoing monitoring of patients, but we have to look at how that will be funded and what were we going to not be able to fund in order to be able to deliver that. And that's something that is yet to be decided, but is certainly being considered as part of the NHS transformation.
Some more questions, I think, from the gentleman.
Actually, I was going to ask about Wynn's prostate and Wynn's bowel, but has he disappeared?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, he has. Well, I mean, he gave some figures for his own personal genome testing, where he had increased incidence of those two diseases. But my knowledge of it is still the environmental factors would massively overrule that. I mean, my chance of bowel cancer in Australia is 10 times higher than West Africa because we eat junk food all day. And prostate cancer, I mean, President Obama's risk is 70 times higher than the President of China, you know, and these seem to be environmental influences. I mean, they're still going to dominate, aren't they, for the average person, unless you've got Lynch syndrome, and that obviously gives you genetic bowel cancer.
I think, I mean, you're right, and you know, I think again we're at the beginning of this. As I said about smoking, invariably personal preference takes place at the moment, but we're living in a world where in the past we've been able to ignore a lot of this. And I think the point Wynn made is true, is that actually you do adapt your behaviour when you get the correct signals. And so anyone who's bought a Fitbit finds they walk further than they did before. Anyone who has one of those car measurement things that tells you how to drive will adapt their behaviour accordingly. And part of the human condition is to put your head in the sand and ignore the fact that we know smoking's bad for you and chips are bad for you because we had a relative who lived a long time from smoking. So there is evidence that incentivizing through personalized feedback of your outcomes will affect your behavior. But yeah, you're right, a lot of people will still ignore that. What will more likely happen is that those that have that incentive will affect the market such that companies then develop products that react to that. So low-fat burgers, for example, or whatever. You know, it's more likely that the products that we eat will change to reflect the drivers on us.
If I had a rare disease, yes, I would. If I had a child with a rare disease, yes, I would. If I was fit and healthy, would I? I'm actually not sure that I would. I think that there is more, I'm going to be really controversial here now, but I think there are more to human beings than their genome. I agree lifestyle is incredibly important. And there are some things perhaps that we don't want to know, or I don't want to know. And I think that's part of the choice.
Would anybody who put their hand up like to say why they would have the genome sequence?
I'd say because if you're thinking about your future health, there's certain indicators as a broad spectrum of possibles, you're more likely to change your lifestyle if there are lifestyle effects, whereas if you don't know, you'll be blindly going and accelerating your own personal health.
One of the things I was going to follow up on, of the group who had their hands in the air, I suspect most of those people actively eat well and try and exercise, and they're people who are engaged in their health and they're trying to think about their future and looking after their self. You know, we're selfish beings in many ways, and that's probably a lot of the overlap. How many people would really do it for altruistic views, for society's benefit? And that's a different question, I guess.
If you just take a disease, we know a lot about Huntington's disease. There's nothing you can do about that, but people have the option of finding out whether they've inherited the condition or not. And so the serious question that they have to ask themselves is, do they want to know? Because there is nothing that you can do. And of course, with a whole genome, you're just tripling million times that, because you're going to find things that you can do, that there are lifestyle changes that you can do, but you're going to find a lot of which you have, at this moment in time, not able to influence in any way. And so maybe that will all change in the future, but I think we have to think very carefully about these things.
I haven't heard anybody yet talking about the potential negative impacts of knowing this information. Many GPs have to cope already with large degrees of health anxiety. Is there not a risk that this might increase that?
I think that that is a concern. So my experience of 23andMe is that a woman was suggested that it might be helpful. It was her nutritionist that suggested it would be helpful. It was done, and she turned out to have MCAD, medium chain acyl-CoA deficiency. The letter came back from 23andMe saying that this had been identified and this was a condition that people could drop dead from. And that was it. And so I think that we have a responsibility, if we put this forward as a way forward for our patients and as a genetic test, that one, people are fully aware of possible outcomes and what it could mean, and that secondly, if we get something, they receive the support that they need in order to work through whatever it is that has been found. If you do this in isolation, then it will have very positive benefits for some people, but it will have negative consequences for others. So it cannot be done out of context. It has to be done within an environment where the people requesting the test understand what they're doing and can help the patient to deal with the consequences of what's been found.
I was just wondering at what point genomic testing would be done. Would it be done when, say, somebody had discovered they already had a condition? Would it be by choice as an adult, or automatically upon birth, or
well, I think,
even further back when the fetus?
Yeah, I think we're talking about different things. So with the 100,000 Genome Project, the whole genome sequencing is being done in individuals who have been identified as having a definite or very probable genetic condition. They will have already been seen, they will have already had the standard genetic testing that is available. And for most of those people who are in that situation, the diagnosis will be made at that point. And then the 100,000 Genome Project is picking up those individuals where testing has come back and it has not given the answer. And it's trying to provide the answer for those people. And that is one group, and I think that you can argue very strongly the advantages of testing in that group. You're going into a completely different arena if you start to think about whole genome screening in unaffected individuals, and even more so when you start to talk about it in doing it in newborn babies. And I suppose it's that Brave New World kind of possibility that all newborn babies have their whole genome sequenced, and you have their kind of health for the rest of their life mapped out for them and what they should and shouldn't do. And that, I think, is a definite possibility. We're getting very close. We're not there yet, but we're getting very close to that. And that's where society has to come in and say, is this what we want? And is that part of a National Health Service, or is that going beyond the remit of a National Health Service, which is there to try and help people who have got a condition to have the best possible treatment for that? And clearly part of an NHS is preventative, but how far does that remit go? And I think that's a societal question that we've got to discuss.